Good morning. Welcome to today's accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shivers, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Profit, Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. Welcome to members of the public joining this meeting. These meetings are designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work and performance of Hertfordshire Constabulary. The meetings are broadcast for transparency. They're on watch-only mode, so there's no facility for public questions, but we hope you find the conversations that we have useful. We've got 5 items on our agenda this morning. We're going to be covering in this order: domestic abuse, 2025-2026 review operation Hotspot, World Cup planning, knife crime, and a progress update on DBS checks. So we'll start off then with domestic abuse, which is a significant amount of workload for policing. Sees sadly a not inconsiderable number of victims nationally every single year, and a lot of work goes on in Hertfordshire in terms of addressing it. Perhaps if I could just start by asking how the constabulary performed in responding to domestic abuse incidents in the last financial year, and how did that compare to the previous year?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. Domestic abuse, as you rightly say, is the biggest cause of harm in Hertfordshire and probably in counties up and down the country, largely but not exclusively affecting women. And the constabulary has a really sharp eye on this in terms of prevention, safeguarding, investigating, supporting victims, and, as you would expect, tackling perpetrators. In the last year, we have recorded more domestic abuse crimes than the previous year, an increase of just over 10 percentage points. 12,716 crimes between the period of the 1st of April 2025 to the 28th of February 2026. That's, as I say, up 10% previous year. Some of that, as we've spoken about a number of times, is as a result of us now properly recording crime, which we had been previously identified for not doing so. Some of that, I'm not blind to the fact, maybe increases in some levels of crime and harm that are happening. So there's a challenge there for us to continue to crack down and focus on driving down domestic abuse. On the upside, I'm pleased to report, however, in the same period I've just reported, the amount of crimes that we have solved successfully, either through court or other means of disposal, has increased by just short of 28%. 814 successful resolutions up to 1,041. We still, however, do not solve enough of the domestic abuse offences to report it to us. There are still, for me, too many where we know who the offender is because the victim's told us, and we don't manage to secure the evidence of the victim's support to get that individual to a court or through an out-of-court disposal. So we have much work to do, even though I'm pleased to say we're better recording it and we are solving more. We have a very high conviction rate at court, so when we do lay charges with the agreement of CPS, in the last 12 months, the conviction rate was nearly 90%. So we're bringing good evidence. We just need to more often bring that good evidence into the court situation. So solid progress, absolute attention on doing even better, but more work to do, Commissioner.
Thank you for that update, and welcome the progress that's being made on that. And you're right to highlight the high rates when charges are being brought, and indeed, the arrest rate for Hertfordshire on domestic abuse is higher than the national average. I understand as well that's positive. Recorded incidents in Hertfordshire sit below the national average. We've talked about the work that's been done to improve crime recording. How confident are you that those figures now reflect the true figure, and that actually Hertfordshire just does have a slightly lower number of incidents than the national average? What's the constabulary doing to build confidence and encourage victims to come forward and report abuse in the first place?
Thank you, Commissioner. We look at this really carefully. So if I look at the 3-year trend, you're right to say that we are below the national average for a population size in Hertfordshire in terms of how much domestic abuse we record. But in the last 12 months, as I say, we're starting to see that line track increase. So we're recording more of the crime that I think we should. I am really alive to the fact that there is a risk we are not getting all crime reported to us. but the crime that is being reported, we are recording properly, and we're doing an awful lot to make sure victims do feel confident and aware of how to report things to us. And there's ongoing work in that space. For example, our corporate communications teams have run a number of campaigns talking about domestic abuse, talking about harm, talking about coercive controlling behaviour, talking about violence against women and girls, and we will continue to do so. To effectively say that constabulary is here to help, we need to hear from you. We work incredibly closely with our partners in the county council, children's social care, adult social care, with domestic abuse professional groups and charities to make sure that we're tied in with them. So there are other channels for victims to come forward to us. We use appropriate times of the year. For example, in April, we had a stalking awareness week where we talked an awful lot about that horrible crime of victims being deliberately targeted by perpetrators. Through the World Cup that's coming up, awful lot of time not only thinking about policing of the World Cup, but what can happen during the World Cup: increased drinking, which can lead to increased violence in the home and increased threats and abuse. So we'll use all these opportunities and all those kind of networks to make sure that victims have an opportunity to come forward to us, because we mustn't be, and we are not complacent about it.
So thank you for that. And when victims do come forward, how is the constabulary working to ensure they're supported and updated as part of the investigation, and that victims are in a position where they're more likely to support police action?
Thank you. This is a vital area of our work that we must get right. So not only do we focus on making sure that our officers and staff understand the importance of supporting victims from that first call right through the investigation, right through any subsequent criminal justice processes, so they have the information they need, they know what the next stage of the process is, they know where extra support and help is available. And that extra support and help service, not just police supporting victims, is a key part of our strategy. So we have something called independent domestic violence advisors, who we work incredibly closely with. Their professionals, counsellors, trained individuals, very often with lived experience, who are not cops, but they work with that victim to help support them and provide that kind of safe intermediary with us, which is a really tried and tested and fantastic initiative in Hertfordshire takes full part of, as do others around the country. And as we've talked about before, there are a number of requirements on my officers and staff in terms of what they must do in terms of assessing victims' needs, complying with the victims' codes of practice, that we monitor and track and ask and ensure that our supervisors are doing that, so the victims are getting the right support. There are different ways of talking to us now, so we use you can talk to an officer member of the staff when you're reporting something as a victim through video technology. So there's all sorts of different ways and all sorts of different systems we use to try and help a victim to feel as supported as they possibly can when they're coming forward with, you know, the trauma that they're dealing with at that moment in time, and perhaps have been for many years. And there's much more I could say, but we're doing an awful lot, Commissioner, because supporting a victim is key.
Thank you. And in those cases where the victim isn't supportive of police action, but where the evidence justifies it, it's possible for the police to take an evidence-led prosecution. How, we've touched on this at previous meetings, and some of the work being done to strengthen that. How's that going in terms of being in the strongest possible position to take a prosecution where the evidence supports it, almost kind of regardless of whether the victim is willing to provide? Thank
you. So we are making some progress in this. I think we have got more ground to make. So evidence-led prosecutions, as you say, is where a victim is not supported, but where we think the evidence is so strong, so compelling, the harm is so great that we need to prosecute the perpetrator. And we did quite a big review earlier this year in 2026, looking at a number of historic cases to say, where was there an opportunity to pursue an evidence-led prosecution? And of the dip sample of cases we looked at, we thought about 10% of cases could have been an example where we could have progressed with an evidence-led prosecution. And as a result of that, we are now thinking about that going forward. So how do we identify those cases early, seek to secure the support of the victim, but if we cannot, then consider working with our partners in the Crown Prosecution Service to bring an evidence-led prosecution. A key part of that is capturing that evidence to lead the prosecution. So things like when officers go to a scene, staff go to a scene of a domestic abuse incident, using their body-worn videos. Pictures speak 1,000 words, that kind of common terminology that's true. So you can capture the trauma, the violence, the impact, the damage, whatever it might be at the scene, which is tremendous evidence. So we're making sure our officers and supervisors think about that. Getting the early witness testimony, doing the early kind of door-to-door inquiries, capturing ring doorbell footage, CCTV footage. It's that's the key to unlocking the evidence-led prosecution that we are working really hard on now. Officers and staff have had training inputs around what's expected, and we are going to be pushing it really hard over the next 12 months. And I hope that the output of that will be, where we can't secure the support to the victim, more offenders prosecuted through an evidence-led approach.
Thank you. And presumably you'll have plans in place to re-dip sample and be anticipating finding a lower figure in future.
Absolutely. We're tracking it through, as I've mentioned a number of times before, our monthly performance board chaired by my Deputy Chief Constable. And one of the key measures we will be looking at is more gross number, more evidence-led prosecutions in the domestic abuse space.
Thank you. When a child is present in a domestic abuse incident, there's something called Operation Encompass, which seeks a notification from the police to the child's school. Can you talk me through how many times that was used last financial year and what work the constabulary does to satisfy itself that happens consistently?
Thank you. A really important approach. The impact of domestic abuse on children is, it kind of obviously doesn't need saying, but it can be huge and it can be unseen and it can manifest itself in the future way. So we work really hard to get this right. So if I give you the numbers over the last 3 years to highlight the fact that we're doing this well, I think in 2023 there were 9,600 just over referrals to school under Encompass of a child we thought was involved or may have been exposed to domestic abuse. In 2024 that fell slightly to 9,067. But in 2025, the whole year, with a real push on this, that increased to 11,560. So, and this year to date, the figures I think were to the end of April 4,006, so about 1,000 a month. So on track, we're over 12,000. So we're doing much more of this because it's really important. It's supported by the schools, and of course that means teachers, guardians, and those in those safeguarding positions in schools can be aware, can watch and monitor and support that child who may be going back to a home where difficult things to underplay it unintentionally are happening.
Thank you. That's reassuring to see those figures, and there'll be absolute numbers of referrals, not necessarily individual children, because there'll be potentially multiple referrals, sadly, in the case of individual children, but good to see that is being used. Thank you. Thank you. It's a useful subject to cover, and a lot of focus on it, given the importance of tackling domestic abuse in our county. Thank you. I'm going to go on to Operation Hotspot in the review for the 25-26 financial year. This is the work to focus on additional patrols in our crime hotspots and town centres. How has that gone over the last financial year?
Brilliantly, thank you. I mean, Operation Hotspot, we spoke about it last year as being a tremendous success, and it was, and it's gone from strength to strength. So if I do some comparisons, in the last year, year 2, there were nearly 33,000 hours of additional patrols in hotspots. So that is an increase of 25% more hours in those hotspots from a tremendous start in the first year. We made 370 arrests in the year, up from 333. We stopped 654 individuals in those hotspots for suspected criminality, around the same as the previous year. We used ASB powers 1,650 times, tackling antisocial behaviour, seized 57 knives compared to 52 in the year before. So we were really, really active where our information and community intelligence says bad things are happening. And as a result of our activity in the second year, on top of a brilliant start in year 1, we saw violent crime fall by another 48 offences, 3% fall. Personal robbery in those hotspots fell by nearly 50 offences, a reduction of 50%. And overall crime and ASB fell by 2.5% again, from a nearly 14% reduction, in year one. So year two has been even more productive, and we've continued to see a number of the crime types we're targeting fall as a result of the activity. So broadly speaking, Commissioner, I'd say it's been a tremendous success.
Thank you very much for that. I know that it's something that the public have been very supportive of in terms of that additional visibility and the impact that has been having. Thank you. In terms of so 2.5% overall reduction in crime, building on the 14.5%. Is your view that that's now, that presence is kind of really now sustaining that kind of lower level of crime in those locations?
I think the data would suggest that we have been even more active in year two. We've seen some specific offence types fall more significantly than 2.5%, but I think we've driven it probably down to a level now that's at a really low level. And the key now will be working with our partners and working hard ourselves, I think, to sustain those low levels of crime now achieved.
Thank you very much. That's very welcome. Thank you for that update. I'm going to move on to our next agenda item, which is planning for the World Cup beginning in June. We won't touch on the football. We'll touch on the community safety aspects and the policing aspects of it. Obviously, it will be a busy time for policing in terms of people cheering the national sides on. What planning and preparations the constabulary are undertaking for that period, and what are the key issues that you're anticipating potentially could arise during the tournament?
Thank you. A lot of planning and preparation, Commissioner, is the answer. You rightly say, the 11th of June to the 19th of July. I'm sure we all hope our teams are all the way through and working right through to the final, but we will see how that goes. So Hertfordshire Constabulary, under the name of Operation Advancement, is putting an awful lot of work into this. So internally, in terms of what we do in the police, I've got a senior officer who we call our Gold Commander, who plans this activity, and he has a number of other individuals who work with him to work that through. So when are the games that are going to most affect us? Where are the places that people are most likely to be watching football? Towns, pubs, clubs. And let's get the policing wrapped around that. And we work really, really carefully with our partners, so the licensed premises, trade, to make sure, the local authorities, to make sure that the presence, the preventative, supportive kind of wrap around that is important. Because what do we want? We want people to enjoy the World Cup, support their team, do it in a sensible, grown-up way, not driven deaths. Not become violent or disorderly, as we know can happen. So we're here to prevent that, but encourage people to behave in the right way. Because sadly, what we do see event by event would tell us over history is during these sorts of events, we do see spike in domestic abuse, probably largely associated with excessive drinking or emotion connected to the outcome of football games, which in no way excuses the violence that then happens. More violence and disorder in the streets, and sometimes increases in hate crime reporting as well. So those are the things we're watching incredibly carefully, and we'll be out there working hard to prevent.
Thank you. Obviously, because the tournament's happening over in America, the time difference means a lot of matches will be taking place later in the day, in the evenings, later into the night. How is the constabulary intending to manage and mitigate the impacts on the nighttime economy in our town centres, for example, of potentially people wanting to watch it and then having that greater number of people in town late in the evening?
I mean, obviously, we will look at the kind of the home nation fixtures. Some of those are known. Some of those will depend on how our home nations do through the tournament, and we will game by game that's known, or as they develop, plan for each one of them. So, if for example England get to the late stages of the World Cup, and that's a late kickoff, we will put specific plans in place around that, expecting to see places in Hertfordshire busy with supporters, hopefully socialising in a safe way, but enjoying the games. So we'll plan around each eventuality.
Thank you. And you're right to highlight the impacts, particularly around domestic abuse. I think it was a study from Lancaster University, the previous World Cup, suggesting that the domestic abuse increased by 38% when England lost their match, and 26% when they won. Drew. So to definitely something to keep a really close eye on. But thank you for that. We'll wish our home teams the very best, and I wish people a very safe period of time watching and enjoying sport. Moving on to knife crime, now it's a big national priority being set by government for policing, and something we want to be seeing addressed locally, which I know it is. What was the constabulary's performance in dealing with knife crime and managing habitual knife carriers last financial year?
A real clear focus for us. We have a knife crime action plan in Hertfordshire, which is part of what we want to do, irrespective of the fact there is a welcome national initiative from the government to halve knife crime. In the last year, there were 1,725 recorded knife crimes, which was a reduction of 14% from the previous year. The areas where those knife crimes were more prevalent were Welham and Hatfield district, Watford district, and Hemel Hempstead. They're not high knife crime areas, but they were more prevalent in Hertfordshire. What's important is when you look at those 1,725 over a year, the majority of those were possession offences. So an individual has been found with a knife, very often because of proactive policing. We just spoke about Operation Hotspot. And when officers are doing those stop and searches and they're finding knives, and maybe they're giving words of advice and warnings or cautions or other. So we're finding a lot of this stuff ourselves, and not all of those are a knife point robbery, for example. In fact, fortunately, very few of them are. So the performance is, I'm not complacent about it, because that's still 1,720 too many. The performance has improved to focus on hotspots, the intelligence, and the individuals that we know pose the greatest risk for carrying knives. You mentioned it, something we call habitual knife carriers, where we know we need to be specifically working on an individual. There are 38 people identified in Hertfordshire, 22 are adults, 16 are juveniles, and we are working with those individuals, working with probation, working with youth services, working with adult services, adult and mental health charities, to try to educate those individuals away from that dangerous behaviour, and where they don't, we seek prosecution.
Thank you. And so this, for those possession offences, actually quite high numbers, high percentages being prosecuted or dealt with throughout a court resolution. So it's a stronger data there in terms of action being taken. Thank you. You touched on the constabulary's knife crime action plan. The government published in April its national action plan with the goal of halving knife crime over a decade. How are those two aligned, and how is the constabulary addressing the priorities that the government have set out in the national plan?
Well, we've got, as I've alluded to, our own Hertfordshire plan. Again, I've got a senior officer who leads it for me, and this is their kind of specific piece of work that they drive across the constabulary. So it starts with prevention. I've just talked about the habitual knife carriers, but preventing young people and young adults thinking carrying a knife is safe. So we work incredibly closely with schools, health providers, youth services around that message. And that's that kind of core neighbourhood policing prevention. We work really, really carefully, as I've said, around individuals who we know are on the verge of starting to get into criminality behaviours that put them at risk of carrying knives. Our gang strategy, so where we know violence is happening and where we know knife carriage is high. A clear prosecution focus. We've talked about county lines before, the extra work and the greater impact that the constabulary is having on tackling violent knife crimes, knife gangs who use knives. We will continue to support a number of kind of proactive campaigns through the years. There's a national operation called Operation Sceptre. Indeed, I think there's an intensification week coming up this month, and then later in the year in November, we'll be taking an active part of that from both the prevention and the enforcement perspective. And we will continue to do things as we did last year, like bringing the knife angel into Welham Hatfield, continue to promote the use of knife bins and knife amnesty. So we keep the conversation going, not just between you and I, not just in my organisation, but hopefully in schools and families, about why carrying a knife is never the right answer. And that's how we'll continue to drive it down.
Thank you for that, and I think the Knife Angel legacy is really strong in Hertfordshire, and lots of work still going on linked to that, particularly on that educational piece that you referred to. Thank you. Kind of aligned to that plan, Hertfordshire secures funding from the Knife Crime Concentration Funds, just under £400,000 to support activity to reduce knife crime. What are the constabulary's plans for how that funding is going to be used, and where the activity will be focused to achieve the greatest impact with that money?
Thank you. So we will, I mean, this is welcome additional funding, and we've talked about what the constabulary can do with additional funding, such as hotspot funding that we talked about, the results there. So we have really carefully looked at our hotspots, and we will use that money to identify a small number of places. We've said at the outset, no more than 7, where we believe about 10% of our knife carriage and knife harm is happening. So far, we've identified 3 initial hotspots we're going to focus on. And when I say hotspots, I think it's really important that I say that these are relative to Hertfordshire. But Watford, Hemel Hempstead and Waltham Cross are 3 places where we're going to start, where we think that the benefit of being proactive in those spaces through that hotspot activity, through that partnership working, through working with the nighttime economy and other agencies will have the biggest impact. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to really be targeted and intelligent about how we get into the right places and support or tackle the right people to drive it down. Thank you.
And I think it's a mix of some patrol activity there and some sort of problem solving partnership work as well that is identified for those locations. Thank you. Look forward to seeing the impact of that work. We're going to move on to a progress update on DBS checks, something that's in my inbox from the public periodically. We talked about it earlier in the year, some work you were describing at that point to improve the timeliness of how the constabulary deals with the police aspect of those checks, not for the police function in terms of the whole process. Can I ask for an update on how that's going and the current performance and timeliness in responding when someone is going through a DBS check?
Yes, you can, Commissioner. We spoke to a few meetings ago around this, as you've alluded to, and we've made some solid progress. We still have work to do. But if I give you the headlines in terms of, well, how much work have we got outstanding to do as of the last data I had, which was the week of the 4th of May, there were 4,692 cases that were live and being progressed, 4,692. In the week of the 9th of March, which was close to when we last spoke, the number of cases were almost 5,400. So we've seen a reduction of about 800, 15-20%, I guess, doing a quick bit of maths in my head. We've achieved that through some really targeted use of overtime to drive some additional activity. We've worked with some other DBS teams around the region to kind of intensify that activity. So we've made some solid progress. Pleasingly as well, the cases that were at the older end of the spectrum, so 60 days or older, right at the start of the year, there were over 400 cases that were in excess of 60 days old. And the last data I've had, that number's 27. And ideally, we want that to be as close to 0, if not to 0 itself, because we want to be progressively. Not just because these are people's lives, they're asking for information that needs to come from the police to move forward to get a job, whatever it might be. But obviously there may be some risk there that we need to identify and disclose. So that's why that's a really important measure. So the overall numbers down, the older cases are down. We have work to do. The next plans are, we are in the process of recruiting more people as well. So there will be 3 additional members coming into the team specifically to focus on Hertfordshire work. And this unit is collaborating with our friends in Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire. So there's a couple of other people as well coming in to focus on some of the Cambridgeshire work. So with the impetus we've got, the continued sensible use of additional monies, and those 5 extra people in total coming on board in the coming weeks and months, I hope we will continue to make good progress and drive the numbers down further.
Thank you for that update, and that's really reassuring, I think, particularly around the over 60 days figure, which is, I think, when the kind of national target kicks in to got that down from over 400 to 27 over the last few months is really good. Thank you. And just in terms of that additional staffing, obviously some of that progress has been made around overtime. Is that additional staffing sort of transition to make that more sustainable away from some of that overtime?
Yes, it is. The additional overtime we secured from a national funding pot, but ideally I want a sustainable long-term resourcing model that can do the work we need to do without having to inject cash as kind of an emergency measure.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that update, and well done on that progress. It's really good to see. Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. Thank you to members of the public who've joined us. We'll have another APM in June. I'll close the meeting.